After Valeria's reading tonight, we have one more reading in the series for this fall. Peter Gizzi will be reading on Tuesday, not Thursday, Tuesday, November 17th at 7:30 p.m. He's a very esteemed poet who teaches at University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I should tell you that today's event is being recorded. And I would ask that during the reading that you turn off your mics, although we're going to be doing a different kind of reading tonight, a kind of collective reading with Valerie orchestrating that. So with the students, so students do make sure you turn on your mics when it comes your time to read your part of the chapter that we will be reading together. And I would ask, perhaps we will be followed by a Q&A after the reading, and everyone is very welcome to participate in that. And I would kind of ask for people to turn on their cameras during the Q&A. Or if not during the reading itself, it's always better to read the faces rather than blank screens. But that is your choice, of course. And you can pose questions either directly during the Q&A. This is a live Zoom link call rather than a webinar. Or you can type in questions through the chat, and I will be monitoring those and moderating the Q&A through that medium. So it's a pleasure to have Valeria Luiselli tonight, and I'm happy to be here to introduce her. On a day when it has been reported that the location of the parents of at least 545 refugee children separated from them at the US-Mexico border remains completely unknown, one might indeed be tempted to ask, what can literature do? What is literature for? Valeria Luiselli has devoted an already brilliant career to not only tackling those thorny questions, but also to addressing imaginatively the abyss that history perpetually pries open beneath us. Quote, all I see in hindsight is the chaos of history repeated, thinks the narrator of Lost Children Archive. Quote, in the middle of it all, tribes, families, people, all beautiful things falling apart, debris, dust, erasure. Pressed full tilt against this, however, is the fictive act. The writing of a novel with the deep, clear knowledge that, quote, stories don't fix anything or save anyone, but maybe make the world both more complex and more tolerable, and sometimes, just sometimes, more beautiful. For Luiselli's gift is not only to help us to see what we all too often refuse to see, she also holds up for inspection the blind spots, be they media, political machinations, or our own willful ignorance, which prevent us from seeing at all, even when suffering is in plain sight. Quote, maybe any understanding, especially historical understanding, requires some kind of reenactment of the past in its small outward branching and often terrifying possibilities. Luiselli's fiction provides just such a reenactment, but in doing so, also expands the possibilities of the novel itself, something that in the end has to be larger and more powerful than history in order for there to be the least hope for any of us. Born in Mexico City, Valeria Luiselli grew up in South Korea, South Africa, and India. She has written both fiction and nonfiction and is the author of an essay collection titled Sidewalks, as well as 4 novels, most recently Lost Children Archive and Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions. Her work has been recognized with 2 Los Angeles Times Book Prizes, an American Book Award, the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, a MacArthur Grant, and numerous other prizes. She currently teaches at Bard's main campus and it's a pleasure to have her with us here tonight. Won't you join me in giving a virtual welcome to Valeria Luiselli, and I'm pleased to turn the screen over to her.
Thank you, Peter, for such a thoughtful and generous introduction. You all froze for a moment, but I think you're back. So as Peter said, we're going to try a collective reading. We're going to read from those 20 pages that are written in a single stream. And I took some time just now to divide up those pages in a way that makes sense for us to take kind of the relay race on and take off from where someone left off and begin. I see that there's more people here than were in the class originally, and I'm wondering if you want to if you also want to read, we could have like maybe 3 or 4 more readers, aside from the students in the class. So if you want to read just as well toward the end, it would be just something short, but just raise your hand and I'll assign you. Okay, super, thank you, Fiora. Just you? Nobody else? You sure? Thank you, Susan. Okay, that's it. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. I'm going to assign you a number, and I'm just going to say that number when it's your turn to read. Okay, so I'm gonna start us off. So I'll be number 1. Peter, would you mind being number 2? Ashlyn, if I mispronounce any of your names, I'm sorry. I have never heard you say them, so I'm sorry. Ashlyn, would you be number 3? Soren, would you be number 4? Sadie, number 5? Lena, Rover, number 6? Joseph, number 7? Mariam, number 8? 9, I know your microphone's not great, so number 10. And if we have problems with your microphone, Peter, will you step in? And then Fiora, 11, Susan, 12. What's the number of the page? Don't worry, we'll get there. Oh, we're starting. Okay, yeah, I'm getting there. We're starting from page 319. That's the beginning of Echo Canyon. And right before you go there, if you have the book, if you happen to have the physical book or an electronic copy, do have it with you, and just follow with actual reading. And Susan, yeah.
I have an audio book.
Oh.
So I'm not able to read. I will have to defer. So.
I'm sorry, Susan. You were the last one, right? You were the number
I guess I was thinking you were going to share the screen, but
oh no, sorry.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, Susan. Joseph, my mic might not work. Okay, Joseph, don't worry. If that's the case, either do you want to try it? Just try it out, Joseph. Oh yeah, that doesn't sound good. All right, never mind. You're off the hook, Joseph. If that happens with anyone, either I'll just continue or I'll ask Peter to jump in. Or if any of you that are there and have good mics want to volunteer, just raise your hand and we'll do that. One more thing before we start. On page, if you can just look at a map on page 243. The page number is not on there, but it's box 5. It's if you go to box 5, which is page 241, and open it. On the first spread, there's two maps. They look like this. If you can go to that page, which is 243, and just look at it quickly. 243 and 242, really. What we're going to be reading is a textual version of the map on page 242, the hand-drawn map. You see on this map, there's a red line going down and a blue line coming up. The whole narrative that we're going to read is structured geographically around this area and structured syntactically around this point in this map. Every time that children on this side or on this side look up at the sky on this point where there's a thunderstorm starting to cook, storm clouds are gathering and there's birds flying. Whenever they look at that, the narrator changes point of view, and then we're in another narrator's voice. And so the whole thing we're reading is structured around this map, or it's a textual version of this map. Okay. I think that's enough information. Let's be patient with each other. If we have problems with mics, stumble, nobody worry, okay? All right. And south into the heart of light, we walked Memphis, you and me, closer together and quiet, like the lost children walked somewhere too, under the same sun maybe, though I kept feeling all the time that we were walking on the sun's surface and not under it. And I asked you, don't you feel like we're walking on the sun? But you didn't say anything in return. You weren't saying anything, nothing at all, which made me worry because it felt like you were disappearing and I was losing you all over again, even though you were right there next to me like a shadow. So I asked you if you were tired just to hear you say something, but you only nodded yes. You were tired but said nothing. So I asked you if you were hungry and you said nothing, but nodded yes, you felt hungry, which I felt too, felt hunger ripping me from inside, ripping me apart and eating me from inside out, because I could not feed it anything. Though maybe it wasn't that, maybe it wasn't hunger. That's what I suspected sometimes, that it wasn't hunger, but I didn't tell you that. I didn't say so out loud because you wouldn't understand. I thought maybe it was not hunger, but more like a sadness or like an emptiness, or maybe some kind of hopelessness, the kind of hopelessness that seems like it will never get repaired no matter what, because you're trapped in a circle. And all circles are endless. They go on forever, round and round, this round, endless desert, always the same, in a loop. And I told you, you know how we used to fold pieces of paper, me and you, when we made origami fortune tellers? And you said, So I said, this desert is just like our origami fortune tellers, except that in this one, when you open the paper flap in the corner, your fortune is always desert, every single time, desert, 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 every time. And when you said, again, I realized that what I was saying made no sense, that my brain was just going round and round, empty and full of hot air only. Though sometimes when the desert wind came, it cleared my thoughts for a moment, but mostly there was just hot air, dust, rocks, bushes, and light, especially light, so much of it, so much light pouring down from the sky that it was hard to think, hard to see clearly too, hard to see even the things we knew by name, by heart, names like saguaro, names like mesquite, things like rosote and jojoba bushes. Impossible to spot the white heads of teddy bear chollas right in front of you, right in front of your eyes before they clawed out to scratch and prick us. Impossible to see the outlines of the organ pipes farther away in the distance until they were right in front of us, everything invisible in that light, almost as invisible as things are by night. So what was it for, all that light? For nothing, because if light had been useful, we wouldn't have got lost inside of it, so lost inside that light that we were sure the world around us was slowly fading, becoming unreal. And for a moment, it did disappear completely. And all that was there was the sound of our mouths, breathing thin air in and out, and the sound of our feet on, and the heat on our foreheads burning out our last good thoughts until the wind came again, a little stronger than before, blew on our faces, brushed our foreheads, whirled into our ears, reminded us that the world was still there around us, that there was still a world somewhere with televisions and computers and highways and airports and people and parents. The breeze brought back voices. It was full of whispers. It brought voices from far away, so we knew again there were people somewhere, real people in a real world. And the wind blew some more and shook the real branches around us, the real branches rattling like sidewinder snakes, which were also real. So in my head, I was able to make a list of real things that existed around us in that desert: the sidewinder snakes, the scorpions, coyotes, spiders, grasotes, teddy bear chollas, jojobas, saguaros. And suddenly you said saguaro, like you'd read my mind. Or maybe I'd been saying these words out loud and you heard me and repeated one. Said, look there, look, a saguaro. And of course, there wasn't a saguaro, but there was a nopal cactus right in front of us. A nopal where 6 fat, prickly pears had sprouted, full of sweetness and water. Mama called them tunas. And they were real. We picked them all, dug our fingernails into them, peeled their thick skin off in chunks. No matter if our fingers were getting pricked by 1,000 tiny thorns, they were real. And we ate them like we were coyotes, the juice bursting out and trickling down through our teeth gaps, down around our chins, down along our necks, and disappearing under my dirty torn shirt and your nightgown. I realize now that they were torn and dirty and only barely covering our chests, but who could care? At least our chests were there, and our lungs were finally breathing better, filling our bodies with better air and our minds with better thoughts, our thoughts with better words, words you finally spoke out. Said, would you, Swift Feather, would you tell me more about the lost children? Where are they now? What are they doing? Will we see them? And as we walked on, I tried to imagine things to tell you about the lost children so that you could hear them the way I did in my mind and also imagine them. I said, yes, I'll tell you more about them. They're coming to meet us and we'll meet them over there, look. And then I took out my binoculars from my backpack and said, here, hold these tight and look through the lenses. Look over there, see? Focus, focus. Look far away over there toward those black thunder clouds gathering over the valley. Can you see them? I asked you. Do you see those clouds? Yes, you said. Yes. Did you focus? I asked. And you said, yes, I focused. And I said, and yes, I can see the clouds. And I can see the birds too, flying around the clouds. And you asked me if I thought those birds were eagles. So I looked through my binoculars and said, yes, of course, they are there. Those are the eagles, too.
The same eagles the lost children now see as they walk north into the desert plain, beating muscled wings, threading in and out of black thunderclouds. They see them with their bare eyes, the 5 of them, as they walk onward under the sun, keeping close together and silent, in a tight horde, deeper and deeper into the silent heart of light, saying nothing and hearing almost nothing, because nothing can be heard except the monotonous sound of their own footsteps, on and on across these dead lands, never stopping, because if they stop, they will die. This they know. This they've been told. If someone stops in the dead lands, they never come out, like that boy among them, the 5th, who didn't make it, and the man in charge, who was gone, and also like the 6th boy, who tripped on a root, or a rock, or a ditch, once they were already out of sight of the men who guarded the wall. He had tripped on a root or a rock. No one saw them exactly, but he fell to the ground, his knees knocking, his hands meeting the hard ground, so tired, while the rest kept walking as he crawled on 4s, 1 step, 2 steps, so tired, resisting the hard ground, fighting against the wave of fatigue surging from inside him, 3 steps, 4, but it was no use now. It was too late. He knew he should not stop, but did, even though one of the 2 girls, the older one, had said, get up, don't stop. even though he heard her voice saying, "Get up now," and felt her hand tugging at his shirt from his sleeve, looked up and saw her arm, her shoulder, her neck, her round face that told him, "No, do not stop. Get up right now, I'm telling you." She'd pulled him from his sleeve, which stretched until it ripped half an inch or so, and as he wrapped the palm of his hand around her small clenched fist that tugged at his sleeve, he squeezed her hand just a little to let her know that it was too late now, but that it was okay, and that she needed to let go of him and carry on with the others. And he almost smiled at her as he gave her the black hat he was wearing, and she received it and did finally let go of him, and she walked on, first trotting a little to catch up with her younger sister, who'd stayed behind too to wait for her. And once she'd caught up, she took her sister's hand and continued walking more slowly, limping a little, one foot half shod in a tennis shoe, the other unshod, bloated and bloody, the sole of which was the last thing the boy saw before he allowed his eyes to close, his mind to shift inward, his thoughts to call up the image of his grandfather's bony brown feet with their swollen veins and yellow toenails, then a bucket full of clenching lobsters, the metal clips a girl holds to his own feet, relieving him from the pain that bound him to this body, to this life, and then the never-ending train tracks unraveling behind him and fading into hollow light, so much light, until his elbows gave in and bent deep, so tired, and his chest spread on the sand, so tired, and his lips, half parted, touched the sand, so tired, until the fatigue slowly faded from him, a relief, a final whimper, like a tide at last retreating. He could stop resisting, fighting, trying. Finally, he could just lie there completely still in the same spot where one morning, months later, two men who patrolled the borderlands will find the bones that were his bones and the rags that were his clothes, each of them collected in transparent bags by one of the two men who found him, while the other man takes out a pen and a map and marks a spot on the map with the pen, one more spot among a few other spots on the paper map that will later be handed over that same afternoon at 4 o'clock or 4:30 p.m. to the methodical old lady who was born many years ago in a house near a smoky lake in the Annapurna Valley, was relocated as a teenage girl to this desert, and now sits in front of a computer in a small office every weekday, sipping iced coffee from a reusable straw while she waits for the monitor to boot up, her eyes fixed on the screen, which first lights into a generic blue, then slowly pixelates into the custom background of the Annapurna range, snow covered at sunrise and pristine, and finally freckles with file icons popping and scattering into successive visibility, while the palm of her hand is wrapping itself around the mouse, squeezing it a little and shaking it awake until the cursor arrow appears from a corner of the screen and is dragged across her desktop snow-covered mountain, is swept over baby blue file icons labeled Animas Valides, San Simon Valides, San Pedro des, and finally stops and is double-clicked on Sulphur Springs Valides, which opens up and spreads out across the screen, covering the lovely snow-covered mountain on her screen, layering dirty brown sand over clear white snow, dirty sand and red death spots over everything, death marks over fucking everything, the lady mutters between her teeth, because the map of that desert valley, the Sulphur Springs Valley, which is exactly the same, but also not the same desert valley right outside her small, dark, but well air-conditioned office, is speckled with hundreds of red dots, all of them added manually, one by one, by her, the lady who is never late for work, and sips from reusable straws in order not to pollute, and sits up straight in front of the computer monitor while she listens on her earphones to an only mildly pornographic but rotundly moralistic lesbian romance novel written by author Lynn Cheney titled Sisters, not at all oblivious to the fact that the author of the novel is the wife of the ex-Vice President Dick Cheney, who, under President George W. Bush, directed Operation Jumpstart, during which the National Guard was deployed along the border and a 20-foot cement wall was erected across the part of the desert, passing just a few miles from her office, which itself is nothing but a small rectangle walled off from that disgusting desert by just a meager adobe wall and a thin single-leaf aluminum door, under the crevice of which the hot, relentless wind drags the last notes of all the desert world sounds disseminated across the barren lands outside, sounds of twigs snapping, birds crying, rocks shifting, footsteps trudging, people imploring, voices begging for water, before fading into silence with a final whimper, then darker sounds like cadavers diminishing into skeletons, skeletons snapping into bones, bones eroding and disappearing into the sand. And none of this the lady hears, of course, but somehow she senses all of it, as if sound particles were stuck to the sand particles blown by the desert wind into the faux grass of her welcome mat, so that every day before stepping into her office, she has to take her mat and hit it against the external adobe wall of the office, dusted off with 3 or 4 hard slaps against the wall, until all those annoying sand particles are blown back into the desert air, back to the streams and currents of the desert air's unfiltered sounds, carried eternally across empty valleys, sounds unregistered, unheard, and finally lost, unless by chance they happen to spiral into the small conch-shaped sockets of human ears, such as those of the lost children who now listen to them and try to name them in their minds, but find no words, no meanings to hold on to, and continue to walk, the sound of the slow flow of footsteps thumping beside them, their eyes always fixed on the ground below them, and only once in a while directed up toward the horizon, where they see something happening, though they cannot say exactly what, maybe a rainstorm, clouds gathering, far away over there, black thunderclouds gathering over the valley, over there. Look, can you see them? They ask each other. Over there, those birds, maybe eagles. Can you see them? And yes, one of the boys says yes, says another. Yes, we see them.
Thank
And
you.
yes,
Number 3. Thank you, Peter.
And yes, I think they are eagles. You and I saw them, Memphis, those eagles, though we could not hear them, because around us we had heard too many other sounds, strange sounds, so strange that I didn't know if they were in my mind or in the air, like the bells of a church, and many birds scattering, like animals moving around us, quick but invisible, and maybe the sound of horses approaching. And I wondered if we were hearing the sound of all the dead in the desert, all the bones there, and remembered that time Papa had read us a story about a body some people found in a field and just left there, and that body in that story had got stuck to some part of my brain and kept coming back to me, because stories can do that. They stick in your head, so that when we were walking in the desert, I would keep thinking about that body in a field and was scared to think maybe we were going to walk over someone's bones buried under us. But still we just kept on walking, on and on, the heat always getting heavier and the sun on our foreheads stinging us like 1,000 yellow bees, even though it was a bit lower now, and making small shadows around everything, stones, bushes, cacti, and on we went, until I tripped on a root or a rock or a ditch and fell, and my hands hit the hard ground and my palms were full of tiny pebbles and dust and maybe thorns, and I felt like just lying there and putting my cheek to the ground and falling asleep, just a short nap maybe, but you started pulling me by my shirt, tugging at my sleeve, saying, "Stand up right now, I'm giving you an order, Swift Feather," and though you were younger, you suddenly sounded like you had to be obeyed. So I stood up and said, "Yes, ma'am, Major Tom Memphis," which made you laugh first, and then you were crying, then laughing again, round and round like in a circle, all our feelings and bodies changing like the wind. And in that instant, we heard the sky roaring, and we looked up and saw the storm clouds gathering in front of us. They were still far away, but closer now than before. And then we saw lightning cracking the huge sky like it was an egg, and the eagles again, which we could now see with our bare eyes, even though they still looked like tiny dots. They looked like lost mittens in the sky looking for their mate down on earth, you said. And then we saw another strike of lightning, even brighter this time than the first. The lost children see it too.
4. The lost children.
The lost children see it. 2. As they continue marching in the desert, the radiant and repetitive desert, trying to listen for the sound of thunder that should follow lightning, but hearing only the monotonous thump of their footsteps in the sand. On and on as they continue forward, and though the path across the desert plain is always straight, they feel that they are somehow descending, especially now that they have left the hot wind behind them and are sinking into an airless heat, into the lowest point of the basin-shaped valley, where they reach an abandoned village at the hour when the sun is low and children would normally come out to play. Only there is no one in the village, and nothing can be heard except their footsteps, echoing against walls stained yellow by the flat, low sun. Nothing but old, forgotten houses, some of which have walls that are cracked, and broken windows through which they can see empty bedrooms, pieces of broken furniture, some abandoned belongings, the sole of a shoe, a broken bottle, a fork, and one of the boys, the youngest of the bunch, sees a pink cowboy hat and picks it up. He doesn't care that it's dirty and worn. He puts it on his head as the 4 children continue to walk amongst the scatter of broken adobe blocks, overgrown with few weeds, some of which they pull out with their hands and put in their mouths, the sour taste making them spit and gag. And as they do, the youngest girl starts to hear something different, a sound like whispering voices, hears voices all around her whispering words. But where are the mouths that whisper them? And the other boy, younger than her, who now wears the pink hat, hears them too. Although he says nothing and only thinks to himself, listen, listen, heart, listen. Like only the saints have listened before. And in that murmurous silence, both of them, girl and boy, the youngest of the 4, hear the deeper echoes of the things that were once there and were no longer. The chiming of church bells, mothers heavy with weeping, grandpas dispensing instructions and scoldings at the breakfast table, blackbirds scattering into high trees in town squares filled with music, the uninterpreted murmur of other children who had died there before them, where one voice says, here we will find the doors to paradise because the doors to paradise exist only in the intimate desert, here on the earth scorched by the sun, where nothing else grows. And another says, no, you will not find anything here because the desert is a tomb and nothing else. The desert is a tomb for those who need to cross it. And we will die under the sun, this heat, a murmur says. This is nothing, another answers. Wait till we get to the valley of San Simon. They say it feels like it sits at the doors of hell. It's hot here, the old girl says now. And here voices sound so loud and clear, so real as the 4 children pass the limits of the abandoned village and nothing is left for them to hear. Nothing except the sad sound of wind breathing while they continue to walk together in a closed horde, deeper into the valley, above which the sky is filling with clouds, thick clouds, gathering swiftly with the redeeming promise of change, of water, of shade, far away still, but not too far now because there is another flash of lightning, this time followed by the distant rumble of thunder. And the 4 children look up towards the storm that will come when they reach the very heart of the valley, where the eagles are now flying in strange patterns, like writing a sky message in a foreign alphabet. And for the first time, they hear their whistling and piping, and high-pitched calls listen. And high-pitched calls, okay.
Thanks.
And for the first time, they hear their whistling and piping. And high-pitched calls listen, you said. Listen, swift feather. You said you could hear voices, good voices, maybe like in a playground or a park somewhere nearby. Good and real voices. And I tried to listen, but I couldn't hear anything except for the blood in my heart pumping. And thought, heart, listen, heart, shut up. And try to listen to the voices and try to follow them, stop and listen when we both stopped and went under the shadow of a red rock. I did hear the sound of the wind breathing and the sound of space shifting, but I heard nothing that sounded like human voices, just hollow, empty sounds. It was so hot. It's so hot here, I said. Aren't you hot? I asked, but you said nothing, answered nothing. So I didn't know if I had thought a thought or spoken real words. And when we got up again and carried on walking, all I could hear was the sound of your little feet thumping on the ground, the sound of your feet like a sound shadow next to me and my own feet, and then farther away, the sound of other footsteps moving in front of or behind us. Across the desert, identical. It must be hard to be dead, you said. And I asked, what do you mean? Though I knew what you meant because also I felt like I was dead, and thoughts were bouncing off every rock back to me, only interrupted by threatening thunder now and then. From heavy clouds in front of us, which were getting much closer to us, or us closer to them, and closer also to the eagles, which we could finally hear. Their whistling and piping, high-pitched sounds that the lost children confused with the sound of laughter and cries. Children laughter and children cries. Like in a playground where many children gather to play, except there is no playground and no playing. Nothing can really be. What?
Sorry. Number 6.
Sorry.
Don't worry. Number 6 takes it from after their whistling and piping, high-pitched sounds that.
Sounds of the lost children confused with the sound of laughter and cries. Children laughter and children cries. Like in a playground where many children gather to play, except there is no playground and no playing. And nothing can really be heard on the ground where they walk, except for those little footsteps, shuffling their own footsteps, walking in the inanimate desert on sand scorched by the sun, and maybe hundreds or thousands of other lost footsteps. It must be toilsome to be dead, one boy thinks. Hard to be dead here. He thinks I remember something his mother said to him one day. She said that angels never know if they are alive or not. The angels forget if they live among the living or among the dead. But the 4 lost children know they are alive. Although they walk among the echoes of other children, past and future, who kneeled, lay down, coiled into a fetal position, fell, got lost, did not know if they were alive or dead. That vast, hungry desert where only the 4 children, 4 of them, now keep walking in silence, knowing they might also soon be lost, thinking, who can we call upon now? No one, knowing that they cannot call upon anyone, not men, not angels, not beasts, especially not the beasts who silent but sly and astute notice that they are lost and know that soon they will see their awkward shuffles upon the desert, on the uninterrupted world where everything is unnamed for them. The birds, the rocks, the bushes, and the roots, a world completely foreign, which will swallow them into its nameless as it swallowed each of the other children. The 4 continue to walk, silent, trying to ignore these dark thoughts, until the younger of the 2 girls suddenly says, "Look up there. Look at those eagles floating right above us." Look, and the other 3 children look up at the sky and see a thick blanket of rain clouds before them, not too far, and indeed those strange eagles flying in a tight flock instead of alone, which is how eagles usually fly.
Number
Why?
7.
Shall I pick up the slack, Valeria? I don't know who number 7 is. Or do you want to? Valeria's frozen, it looks like. Okay, we're gonna wing it here. I'll just pick up the slack and keep going. But why, you asked me, Memphis, why are those eagles flying like that, Swift Feather? Why this, why that? Why you keep asking such difficult questions as we walked toward the thunderclouds, getting closer and closer to them. Why, where, what, you asked, but how could I answer all of your questions, Memphis? Questions and more questions. How are swamps made? What is the purpose of thorns? Why don't I laugh when I tickle myself? Why can't I laugh anymore at all? Why does the air here smell like chicken feathers? And why, look, why are there all these eagles flying together above us now? Do you think they are following us? Do they want to eat us, or are they protecting us? And why? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, Memphis. But no, the eagles won't eat us. No way, I said. They're taking care of us. Don't you remember the eagle warriors Pa always told us about? I asked. And you said yes, you remembered, and then said, let's follow them. Let's pretend the eagles are kites and we have to follow them like when we follow a kite, which was a brilliant idea. So we did just that. We started following them, clutching invisible holders attached to invisible strings, and walked for a while like that, looking mostly up toward the sky, our eyes on the eagle kites, taking slow steps forward until suddenly, very suddenly, an abandoned train car was in front of us, some 50 yards from us, and we noticed the eagles stop moving forward and start just circling above the empty space where the train car lay. How it had got there, we had no idea, but we stopped our march and stared at it. I took a picture of it, and we stared some more, and then we looked up at the thick clouds getting ready to burst into rain, and at the eagles above us, which were now flying in a perfect circle over the train car, under those clouds, and
Thank
the
you,
four
Peter.
lost children.
Number 8. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Number 8.
Who is number 8?
I'll continue. No. Unless someone steps in right now. No? No? Okay. It's a very short one. And the 4 lost children see them too, circling low in the sky under the rain clouds, and decide to walk straight toward them, straight ahead, walking much more swiftly now that the sun is sinking in the sky, walking until they spot an abandoned gondola, still small but clear in the distance, and walk straight to it, stopping right under its shadow, their 4 backs against the rusted metal side, not daring yet to go inside it, though the sliding doors are wide open, because whenever they hold their ears to the warm metal wall of the gondola, they hear something shuffling about inside, a person or a large animal maybe, and decide they will not risk it unless they have no other choice later, no other place where they can take refuge from the imminent storm, because the threatening, heavy rain clouds are right above them, and it's almost sunset. Number 9.
Do we have a number 9? Shall I take it, Valeria?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
It was almost sunset and the heavy rain clouds were right above us and we were tired, and also there was fear coming at us, Memphis, like during all the other sunsets. So we walked slowly toward the train car, wondering was it empty and was it safe, and hoping maybe we would find old food in there, stored in boxes, because I knew those train cars all transported boxes of food from one edge of the country to the other edge of the country. And then you stopped a few steps from the train car and said I had to go and look inside before you would take another step. So I did. I walked slowly, and my feet were making more noise than ever against the thorny, pebbly ground toward the train car, which was large and had been painted red, but the paint had peeled off in parts, and there was rust underneath, and the sliding doors were wide open on both sides, so that when I stood in front of the train car, it looked like a window I was looking through from our side of the desert to the other side, which was exactly the same as ours, except for the higher mountains on that other side at the end of the stretch of desert. And the sun was setting behind us on the flat horizon, and in front of us through the train car doors were the high Chiricahua mountains, and I picked a rock up from the ground and held it right in my hand, noticed that my palm was sweating, but I took 3 more steps, small steps, and swung my arm back and then slowly forward, and let go of the rock so it would rainbow across the air and fall into the train car, slow and soft, like I was throwing a ball for someone your age to catch. And the rock hit the metal surface of the train car floor, thumped, echoed once, then was followed by a flutter that got louder and then louder. So I knew it wasn't an echo but a real sound, and then we saw it, enormous, its huge wings spread out, its curved beak and small feathered head. It paddled in the air, out of the train car, into the sky until it was a smaller object there, and joined the circles of eagles hovering above us, and we were looking up at them like we were hypnotized by their circles, when a rock came suddenly flying back at us.
Thank you. And I'll just read a bit more because we're almost out of time.
Good.
A rock the older girl had just thrown from behind the rusted wall of the gondola and through its open doors. A real rock that the boy and his sister would have mistaken for an echo, confused as they were about cause and effect as the normal link between events, were it not for the fact that the rock thrown back at them hits the boy on his shoulder so very real, concrete, and painful that his nerves wake up alert and his voice breaks out into an angry, "Hey, ouch! Hey, who's there? Who's there?" I said. "Who's there?" he says. And hearing the sound of his voice, the four children look at one another in relief, because it's a real voice, finally, clearly not a lost desert echo, not a sound mirage like the ones that had been following them all along. So they smile at one another, and first the older girl, and then the younger one, and then the two boys peek their faces around one side of the open door of the gondola. Four round faces were looking right at us from the other side of the train car, so real I didn't believe they were real. Thought, can this be, or am I imagining things, because the desert fools you? And we both knew that by now, and I still couldn't believe they were real, even though the four of them were standing right there in front of us, two girls with long braids, the older one wearing a nice black hat, and the two boys, one of them wearing a pink hat. None of them seemed real until you opened your mouth, Memphis. You said, "Geronimo," from just a step behind me. And then we heard the four faces say, "Geronimo," back to us, "Geronimo," the two children say to the four of them from the other side of the abandoned gondola. And I'll leave it there, which is the moment in which the kids finally find each other in their respective journeys.
Great. Thank you so much, Valeria, and for everyone participating. And now's the time we'll have some Q&A. So feel free to raise a hand if you'd like to ask a question over Zoom, or to type it into the chat, and I can monitor the questions there. I'll start just to break the ice, warm things up. Valeria, why did you choose to write this chapter all kind of in one sentence, and switching these perspectives like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking of the way that the time must break up completely and seem both endless but also senseless, like a long, long sentence when one is lost, right? I mean, all of us as children might have gotten lost for a little while and it seemed eternal in the supermarket or wherever. But another very different thing is to get lost in a vast desert. And the idea was to emulate in syntax what that kind of terrifying elasticity of time might feel like. And then this is also the moment in which what has until now been a book that the boy was reading with his mom, through his mom, The Elegies of Lost Children, is somehow completely interiorized by him, right? So he is lost telling his sister this story, lost with his sister, but switching back and forth between the great epic of the lost children that he's been interiorizing until now, and his own decision to leave and run away from the family, from the parents, and get lost with his sister, right? So it's a moment in which it's all kind of coming together. These two strands, these two narrative threads, these two journeys. And so, as I was saying earlier, it all kind of, it's the way that I felt it when I was writing it. It's as if like this, it's like a pendulum or something, something switching back and forth between these two journeys, one south to north and one north to south.
Since you bring up the elegies of the lost children, I have to ask this. What are we to make of the last elegies of the lost children? Because the book gets left on the train and then we get the last elegies. So who is writing those? Who is reading those? Who is narrating those? What are we to do with that?
Great question. The author cannot answer that question, or else I would have the final say of how to interpret that, right? I have my theories.
Well, to me, it seemed a point where the elegies of the lost children sort of transformed into a collective myth. That a story that is owned by no one, right, but is owned by everyone, right, and is by the entire culture. Is that anything like what you were thinking?
That is, I think, a beautiful interpretation, and that is precisely why an author should never give interpretations of of ambiguity, of things left ambivalent, because it's only thanks to that ambivalence that we can hear good minds, sound minds come up with possibilities. I think that's a great interpretation, just as I thought earlier that the eighth box is the book itself, as you were saying. That I'll leave it at that, Peter.
Okay. Others, please. Anyone with any kind of a question, whether in the chat or my internet is maybe cutting out a bit.
I can hear you just fine. Okay. Mine cut out a couple of times during the reading.
Oh, this is Brendan Matthews. I've got a question for you, Valeria. Thanks so much for the reading and for visiting, however virtually. I did want to ask just about the writing of the novel. There's so many voices and so many pieces that it's made up of. When you were working on this, how did you hold this all in your head? Did you treat each of the pieces individually? Were they always there? You were kind of working on them simultaneously? Were there voices or other parts that were in contention for being a part of the book that didn't make it in?
Many things didn't make it in. I would say like almost like the same amount, doubled, didn't make it in. I really like the jellyfish behind you, by the way. How, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a feeling when you're writing a book, when you're just beginning, or I always have this feeling, at least when I'm beginning a new book, which is like, how the hell am I going to do this? And I just don't know. And then once I finished, I always just think, how the hell did I do this? Like there's always the same kind of like sense of walking in the dark when you're doing something, just following like an intuition, right? Just following and in this particular novel has definitely been the hardest thing that I ever wrote. And I think that I just advanced with a kind of blind intuition for a long time, until at some point I was living so much inside of it that I had a complete clarity about its parts. It took a long time to have that clarity. And yes, as you said, as you asked, I work in pieces. I work very meticulously in pieces, and those pieces slowly start to sum up to something. I work in a program that's not Word. I would never be able to write on Word now because everything gets lost. I write in Scrivener, which allows me to keep all the versions and fragments in a way that's accessible, just as a more logistical, crafty answer, but important too, because in craft.
No, well, I've used Scrivener before for a larger project, and being able to move things around and find them and change the relationship seems like an important part of what makes that work?
I used to print out on when Scrivener, I didn't know it existed. I used to print out on Word and like physically on the ground move things around, fragments, to see how they fit with each other, like physically did it, and it worked. It was fine. The first novel I wrote and edited like that, physically shifting pages around and cutting and pasting physically to see how things might reshuffle. But yeah, it's a lot of reshuffling until, I was saying this in the class earlier, like the architecture of things becomes clear to me only after I have enough material to start playing around with it. And then I start shifting, shuffling, and trying to understand what exact form this material needs to be shaped into, right? I never impose a form on something that's not yet there. It'd be utterly boring, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. I can't write like that.
We had an interesting discussion the other night in a community book discussion of the book. I don't know if Susan Beckerman is still here, but she was the one who's, yes, there you are, using the audio book, and we got to talking about the archival material, and the photographs. You know, how somebody listening to the audio book doesn't see the Polaroids, nor do they see, you know, the works cited, which seems a kind of critical element to the book. I don't know if you're aware of that, and it also seems to speak to the very problem that the family is confronting, the audio versus the visual, right? And the memory of audio versus the memory of visual. I don't know if you were aware of this or if you had any thoughts upon
that.
Yeah,
I had some fascinating discussions, first with the people that were producing the audio, then with friends whose life is devoted to thinking about archives and forms and genre. Like I consulted various friends who are academics who think about things like this very seriously. And we kind of didn't see a good, like a good solution, like an absolute solution for the audio, except that the audio had what in the text you often have to imagine, which is, for example, in this, what we just read, this interlacing of voices, right? And in the audio, I think the solution was to have the boy and the woman reading together, you know, and so the woman's voice fades into the boys, right? Yeah.
I listened to quite a bit of my, if we want to call it reading, takes place in the medium of audio for a variety of reasons that I prefer it. And I know that sometimes I'm losing something when there is that kind of material. Very often there is a single actor doing the reading, and the people who do these books, it's a particular skill. And I mean, I've experienced hundreds of books in this fashion, and it's quite amazing that an actor can give voice and distinct voice to many different characters. But occasionally there is a book where different actors are reading the voices, as is true here. And I have to confess, I haven't finished quite listening to the whole thing, but that is very enriching, hearing the different characters with their distinct voices. And because sound is given some attention, you know, it's the core, and starting off with the two adults who are working in the field of sound in their various ways. You know, there's something very apt about that. So, you know, there are trade-offs for sure.
There are trade-offs, but yeah, for example, the visual archive is lost. I think it's, if I remember correctly, you might remember better, it's itemized, and like the Polaroids at the end are itemized. They're like captions that describe. At least in the Spanish version. I don't know what we did in the English version, but in the Spanish version, we have like a caption description of the photographs, so that you at least can conjure them in your imagination. But yeah, I mean, it's the thing with everything in translating between genres. There's always something that is lost in translation, right? I have to go make dinner, my very dear people. I see it's 8:30, and I have a hungry niece and a hungry brother were waiting for me to make shrimp pasta.
Ah,
So I send you all my my regards and thank you very much for your
Thank you.
thank you, Valeria. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Hope to
Thank
see you,
very
Peter
much for your
Gizzi.
time.
Thank you all.
Bye
Peter
bye.
Gizzi reading November 17th. We'll see you then.
Yes. Oh,
Bye, Valeria.
bye, Peter. Thank you for everything. You were wonderful.
Goodbye,
you.
everyone.
Loved listening to your reading, Peter. It was really lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me
thank you.
share this
Thanks.
experience. It's really wonderful.
Thanks, Susan. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye now.